discussion on sustainability and winemaking. And if you want to just leave yourselves in speaker view and muted, then it'll be easier to hear myself and our speaker chat. And then at the end, we'll open it up for discussion. So if anybody has any comments, just leave them in the comments section, and we'll answer them either in real time or towards the end of the chat. So I'm very honored to introduce you all to Lisa Micheli, who's the CEO of the Pepperwood Preserve, who is our next door neighbor to Medlock Ames, which is a huge preserve just to our east. Lisa?
Hi everyone, thanks for including me today. It's nice to meet you, or e-meet you, Zoom meet you. So I think today we're going to have a chance to sort of talk about the connection between winemaking and the work that Ames does, creating these incredible wines that you're about to experience in the vineyard, to environmental and natural resources analyses around climate change. My background is that I'm actually a water scientist. I trained at UC Berkeley in the energy and resources group, and then I got my degree in civil engineering and water resources. And so I've always studied water in the environment, and I'm very, very involved in California at projecting the future of climate change and measuring the climate change that's already happening, and then understanding how it impacts the watersheds and ecosystems of our region. So Ames and I thought it would be fun to tell you a little bit how we got to know each other, the partnerships that we've had between Pepperwood and Medlock Ames, and some of the themes that cut across winemaking and stewarding our natural resources. Ames?
Yeah, so about 10 years ago, we opened our tasting room, which is in the Alexander Valley, maybe 10 minutes away from where our vineyard is. Our vineyard's sort of off the beaten path. So we opened our tasting room in a more frequently traveled area to be a little bit, have better exposure. And we hired a landscape architect named Thomas Woltz. And he was just amazing to work with. And he created this beautiful oasis in the middle of the Alexander Valley, on what was once just sort of this asphalted over parking lot, essentially. He created this beautiful masterpiece. And so after a couple of years, we asked him if he could do something similar at the vineyard. And my idea was that he would just make it look prettier. And he said, Ames, no, it will look pretty, but the design process involves us really understanding the ecology. And we really need to know which plant communities will thrive best to create a landscape that works with the environment, not just a sort of pasted on version. And so he searched around for some local resources that could help him figure out how to really understand what we have here on our 340-acre ranch. And we found that our next door neighbor, the Pepperwood Preserve, had already done all this. They understood their ecology so well, and so we hired them to do this exhaustive analysis of what plant communities, what ecosystems we have on our vineyard, so that we can create a landscape that would fit in with what is naturally supposed to be here. And so that's how we got to know the people from Pepperwood.
Yeah, and so if you haven't I don't know how many people have had a chance to visit Pepperwood, or if we're new to you, but we're basically an ecology institute for our region, and we're on 3,200 acres of protected land that was originally donated to the California Academy of Sciences to serve as a living laboratory and a research site for California ecosystems. And we had just opened in 2009 the Dwight Center for Conservation Science. So the Academy had the property for a long time, but they hadn't done very much with it. And then two local philanthropists, Herb and Jane Dwight, decided to work with the Academy to protect the property, and they opened this center. So we had actually just literally opened the center when we get the call from Medlock Ames and their representatives saying, you know, we would really love to have your ecologist help us better understand our property. And we loved that. It was a great call to get, that we had a neighbor moving in who was interested in learning more about how to work with the property. Because as Ames mentioned, like, we are really proud of the preserve. We have 750 different plant species that live on site and 150 different wild animals that live on site. And those plants and animals aren't restricted to Pepperwood. They live throughout the Knights Valley area, and they're also on agricultural properties. So one of the things we like to do besides doing the research is really sharing the research with, we have a lot of students and kids who come up, but we also work with other agricultural partners and people who have large properties. And one of the things to realize is that the property at Medlock Ames, for example, a certain amount of it is in vineyards, but really the majority of it is wildlands. So we were able to show them the incredible some of the rare plants they had on site, and give them some advice about how to actively manage the property. We have a grass-fed beef operation at Pepperwood. So we are actually in partnership with agricultural producers, and grazing is actually a good way to help our native plants. So that was the kind of information exchange that we had. And that was a little while ago before we reconnected for this. But I think it's a great example of, especially in our area, how agriculture and environmental interests need to work together, because the incredible biodiversity and beautiful place where we live, it's actually a combination of those two things. And even, you know, 200 plus years ago, when Native American people were here, they were actively stewarding this environment to help both the native plants and animals, but the foods and things that they relied on in sort of an agricultural way as well. So, yeah.
Yeah. So when you mentioned, you know, a lot of the vineyard represents about 15% of our total land. So some people might look at that as that we're, you know, wasting 85% of the ranch, but we really view that other area as really, I think the way you would describe it is it's providing ecological services to us. There's this huge reservoir of insects that live there, that some of them feed on vineyard pests, and there's just this very robust ecosystem that thrives, and that sort of creates this very healthy balance that the vineyard is. It's a huge buffer also between us and the next closest neighbor that might be an agricultural operation.
And as a water scientist, I think that those wildlands also are a very important place. If you think about our local water supply, or the water that the vineyard has to draw on, it's actually partly being captured by those wildlands that receive the water, filter it, and then enable it to be available for pumping out for using in the vineyard. And I mean, one thing I like to share with people too, the great partnership with vineyards is that vineyards still allow the rainfall to get into the ground. And that's another example of an ecosystem service that an agricultural property can play. Is a good recharge protection strategy, say, compared to paving it over with a parking lot or putting in a development. It's a better water quality and water quantity solution too.
So there are three kind of main topics we wanted to discuss today, and we're going to pair a wine with each one of these discussions. So the first one is about sort of, you know, the global climate situation, and we're going to pair that with our 2018 Sauvignon Blanc. Then we're going to talk about what Pepperwood Preserve and what Medlock Ames are doing to adapt to climate change, and we'll pair that with our 2017 Right Bank, which is a blend of Cab Franc and Cabernet Sauvignon. And then we'll talk about sort of the impacts of the Kincade fire that swept through here last year, and you know, how we're dealing with that. And we'll pair that with our 2017 Cates and D's Cabernet. So while I open the Sauvignon Blanc, I was wondering if Lisa could start talking a little bit about some of the studies you've done on global climate change.
Sure. Well, right around the same time we met Medlock Ames, we were really lucky to He's supported by the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation as a place where we could bring together all different scientific experts from Stanford, University of California, government agencies. And what they asked us to do was try to figure out, remember this is 2009, so 2007, Al Gore's movie Inconvenient Truth had just come out. The world's first climate projections, global climate projections, were produced by a global entity called the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate. And as someone who works really hard to get teams of scientists together and to get them to agree about something, this is a panel that actually came up with agreement about the trajectories that the planet was on. And there's not just one prediction, there's actually about 100 predictions that are all equally valid from a scientific viewpoint. So, and then I sort of came to this work because I was working in the Napa Valley with the Rutherford Dust Society, and I was helping them come up with a river restoration project for the Napa River in that area, which I think all of you probably know is probably one a famous Cabernet area. And I realized that I was developing a project to restore this river that could take 100 years to really fully come to fruition. I didn't have any information about how climate change might impact that river. And also the vintners and growers didn't have much information about how it would impact the grapes. So this team developed what we call an approach to downscaling these global models. So it's taking these very big models that have, like, if you think about the pixels on your computer screen or on your TV, there was like 1 pixel for Northern California. And we turned that into millions and millions of pixels to give a very high resolution picture about climate variability that was informed by the variability that we already measure. So, you know, climate change that we've experienced so far and that we can measure on thermometers in this region is pretty close to the global change. It's almost 2 degrees Fahrenheit right now. And I guess the thing about being a climate scientist and working on these projections starting 10 years ago, you know, we like to be right as scientists, but in this case, we were right in a way that we wish we had been wrong, because we forecasted more droughts, we forecasted more heat waves, and we forecasted more floods as well, and an increased hazard of fire. And then over the next, you know, decade, all of those things have come to fruition. So that's part of what we're working right now, is like this term of climate adaptation, which is adapting to how the climate is changing. We're all doing this right now. It's not something we're looking forward to in the future. We don't have to create a computer model about it, but it's really happening right now. So one of the things my scientists study is they take that climate projection, or the picture of what the climate looks like, and understand how animals and plants might respond to that. And so bringing the climate experts together with the experts around, you know, a particular kind of forest or a particular kind of animal to understand its tolerance. Some of our scientists also worked on grapes, because grapes are an organism also. And thinking about the distribution of varietals relative to present climates, and how in the future, and as this area warms, the suitability for different grapes could change in this landscape. And some of our early analyses show that there were areas, for example, near the coast, which are traditionally way cooler than the inland, that were getting warm enough to grow grapes. So we've, you know, worked with groups to think about what strategy would you have if you were, say, a very large wine, you know, very large scale wine company. Like, those wine companies might already be thinking about buying lands in cooler areas as an adaptation strategy. But in the case of Medlock Ames, where there's a commitment to, you know, growing grapes in a particular site, then you have different adaptation strategies to get to sort of what are you growing, how do you put the vines in, what's the solar exposure and solar radiation of a bunch of grapes. One of the scientists in our team actually used a fish eye camera from like a grape's eye view to look at the heat loading on a bunch of grapes over the course of the day, and how you might manipulate the vineyard to modify that. So these are all interesting conversations we've been having. I'll say the big uncertainty about, the big certainty about where we're headed in terms of climate change is that things are getting drier. Even though we might have very high rainfall years, overall, the landscape's getting drier. And you can kind of imagine these warmer temperatures It's sort of like a blow dryer blowing on the soil, and it puts more of that water in the atmosphere. So whether you are taking care of an oak woodland like we are, or you're taking care of a vineyard, you need to start thinking about how these drier conditions may stress what's growing there or living there. And so it was interesting talking to Ames about, their niche. You're sort of in a cooler niche of the landscape relative to some of the varietals you grow. So it's sort of a built-in adaptation strategy.
Yep, we were discussing that the other day, and you were saying that there was an adaptation strategy to have Cabernet, which is it requires a fair amount of heat to ripen, and we're in a kind of a cooler part of the Alexander Valley, and we always harvest pretty late. So one of the effects of climate change will be, heating up and harvesting earlier, which for us won't be. That's actually probably a slightly good thing. And so you were saying that was a good strategy for climate adaptation, but I told you it was just.
Didn't think of it in advance.
Yeah, it was just dumb luck that we thought Cabernet would be the right thing to grow here. But when you were talking about heat or about water, that's such a huge issue in the West and for grape growing. When we first developed our vineyards 20 years ago, we had this strategy of selecting a rootstock that would match our soil type. And so there's this spectrum of different rootstocks you can use that impart more or less vigor to the vine, depending on what you want to do. And generally, you want a grapevine throughout the course of the season to grow a shoot that's about 1 meter, or a little bit over 3 feet in length. That's just the right amount to ripen 2 clusters of grapes. And if it's less than that, then the fruit won't ripen. And if it's longer shoot than that, then the vine takes too long to ripen. It stays in a vegetative state, and you end up getting sort of green flavors. So we chose rootstocks that were pretty devigorating, so that we wouldn't have these overly vigorous vines. And at the time we thought, well, if we don't get enough shoot growth, we'll just add more water, because that's a resource that we had plenty of, and we still do. But in California, the state owns all the surface water, and landowners get a permit to use it. But there are other competing uses for that water. Endangered species need the water further downstream, or fishermen need enough water for things that they're fishing, and other landowners. Although we have enough water, we need to think a little more carefully about that, because rainfall patterns may change, and we might not have enough water in the future. So when we replant, we're going to need to look at, and which we will, in my lifetime. And so we'll have to start thinking about which rootstocks to use that maybe are imparting more vigor. And then another, in more arid and more drier climates than California, like in Australia, grape growers there have much less water, so they have to be much more innovative. And so we can learn a lot from them. One thing they've discovered is that in a heat spell, that sort of right before a big heat wave, the classic grower response is to irrigate heavily right before that heat wave, so that the vines can weather the stress a little bit better. But if every single grower in the area is using that water at the same time, that's a huge impact on the groundwater if that's what people are using. But so these Australian viticulturalists, researchers have discovered that if you mist the vines, just spray this very light mist every 10 minutes or so during the heat spell, it uses a tiny fraction of the amount of water that you would for irrigating, and the vine actually responds better, because the microclimate right around the grape cluster is much less dry, and so the vine responds a little bit better to that. So we're investigating some of those techniques.
Yeah, I mean, to put it in perspective, I think, so if people aren't familiar with this term, recharge is the how water gets back into the ground and into the groundwater. And you can take groundwater out of the ground a lot faster than you can put it back into the ground. So I think this idea of the groundwater and what we pump is sort of our bank account of water, and then using that surface water very carefully. And this is where some of the projections that we did for natural resources and for the water agency and for foresters helps vintners, because we're able to say, by the end of this century, on the trend we're on, basically at Pepperwood we get about 36 inches of rainfall a year, and we will have 3 to 6 inches less of effective rainfall because that much water is going to be in the atmosphere instead of hanging out in the soil and the ground. And that gives a quantitative measure that the agricultural scientists and enologists can use to think about, which of those varietals might be suitable for 2100, for example.
And I think this next wine we're pouring is our 2017 Right Bank. And I think that's a really good wine to pour for this discussion, because 2017 was, one of the things we're seeing with climate change is, rather than just steady increase in temperature, we're seeing these sort of wild extremes. 2010 and 2011, I think, were the coldest years on record, or in a century. 2013 and 2014 were two of the hottest years, and I think 2017 was even hotter than those. We had, I think, 16 days over 100 degrees in our vineyard. We have a little weather station, so we can track that. And typically we get maybe 3 to 4 days like that. And we had a couple of days over 110 degrees. And so on paper, that those weather extremes, or those high heat spikes, especially when they came. So we had one of these super high heat spells right around bloom. We had another one at veraison, right when the grapes changed from green to red. And then another one in September, right around Labor Day, with sort of in the key ripening month. And any one of those doesn't predict. It's sort of you would expect bad wine quality from those, especially so many of them. But 2017 was actually a really good year for us. I don't know why.
And what you're explaining is like a great way of explaining when I say 2-degree average Fahrenheit warming, and let's just say we did a model of one of the maximum warmings for Santa Rosa, 6 to 8 degrees warming. It's like, okay, well, it's 70 degrees, it'll be 76 degrees, but actually those long-term averages underlie these high heat events. And we estimated there could be 15 times as many days over 95 degrees under some of these scenarios than we have right now. So I think that's a great way of expressing how climate change is not really a gradual trend, and scientists make it show like it's a gradual trend, but it's really these spiky extreme events that we expect things to get sort of more extreme because we're putting so much more energy in the system.
Yeah. So then I thought we would move into our third wine, which is our 2017 Cates and Bees. And then we could talk a little bit about the impacts of the Kincade fire and the fires in 2017. How did those impact you?
Do you want to go first?
You can go first.
Okay. Well, some of you may have seen the newspaper, so Pepperwood is right above Safari West. For those of you who know the area, you actually access it off of Grants Valley Road and Porter Creek Road. So the Tubbs fire, we were right in the path of the first night of the Tubbs fire. My staff were incredibly brave and helped get other people off the mountain, and luckily got out themselves. But we lost all of our housing except for one house at Pepperwood. So 2 staff homes and our barn, which was also our original barn office. So, and 95% of the preserve burned. The only part of the preserve that did not burn was where we had done a prescribed burn ourselves. In June of 2016, we burned a patch of grassland as an experiment to fight some weeds that were fighting there. And I mentioned that we have a cattle operation. Amazingly, the cattle found that spot and hung out there, and we didn't lose any cattle in the fire. But basically the entire preserve burnt, and about 1/3 of it burnt that first night, very, very, very hot, which was the wind-driven part of the fire. And then in the days that followed, over the next 2 weeks, the fire spread much more gradually across the rest of the preserve. So we have a very hot burn and a more gentle burn that happened in that event. And then when Kincade fire came, one of the things we did immediately after the Tubbs fire was we had been contacted by a scientist in Southern California and Nevada who had been working with fire cameras. So I don't know if people have seen the news about the fire cameras and the Press Democrat, et cetera, but we were the first 2 fire cameras put up. So during the Kincade fire, you could actually watch the entire fire from Pepperwood, as I did that evening. We have a very close relationship with CAL FIRE. They know us well, they know the property. So they end up sending up a huge battlefield against the Kincade fire at Pepperwood, which was where they held the line from it getting back down into Larkfield Wickiup. So only half of the preserve burned in the Kincade fire. Thanks to CAL FIRE, they protected the cameras, they protected our new building sites. I was a little worried that I was going to go to work and see our buildings under construction from the Tubbs fire burnt over again, but they were able to save that. And so we have this incredible opportunity now because we have all over the preserve, we have different extents of fire that have impacted the property, and our researchers are really studying the impacts of fire on our local ecosystems. Our ecosystems have not been very much studied about fire. There's a lot of research in the Sierras and Southern California. So it's really an important opportunity, and we're working with CAL FIRE, and most of our work is grant funded, so we apply for grants to do these projects. But we're understanding the impact of the fire on water sheds and how fast the water will sink into the ground or run off, whether there's big flooding hazards. We're looking at how the trees respond and the grasses respond, and we're looking at how the animals respond. We actually have 50 wildlife cameras. Some of them are at Pepperwood, and some of them are at the Modini Mayacamas Reserve on the other side of Medlock Ames. And so we also have this incredible data set about the impact of fire on wildlife.
That's great.
And we're learning how to build fire resilient buildings, which I never knew I'd get to know a lot about. And much like Ames, our Dwight Center was the one building that wasn't impacted because it was built out of concrete and glass and steel, which was a little controversial at the time. And my boss said, everyone said, how did he know how to build in a way that would survive a fire? And he said, I didn't. I just wanted a building that would last a long time. So another adaptation strategy, maybe after the fact.
Yeah. Luck isn't, but that's not a great plan. But it works. Sometimes it works out. Yeah, so for us in 2017, we watched those fires, sweep through Pepperwood and come closer and closer to us. And sort of right between us, but maybe just on your side of the property boundary, are these huge high power lines that sort of supply most of Northern California's power. They run from the geysers up in the hills to the north of us. And I think that was a really high priority area for firefighters. There aren't that many people that live back here, so their main goal was just saving lives at that point, and especially when it was burning in more urban areas. But they wanted to preserve those power lines. So we just got really lucky that the fire stopped there in 2017, just came right up to the edge of our ranch. Wow. And so this wine we're pouring now, the 2017 Cates and Bees, that is a really special wine to me because it sort of commemorates that time when we made it through unscathed. But then in 2019, we were not so lucky that the Kincade fires in October of last year burned pretty much every part of our 340 acres that was not developed. So that it just kind of singed, or actually ran through the vineyard, but it didn't do too much damage. It burned some of the low-lying cover crop and melted a lot of irrigation hose and burned some end posts, but the vineyards themselves survived pretty well. But we lost one structure and just so many trees. It's just unfathomable. And during the winter, it didn't seem so bad just because everything's dormant and everything kind of looked the same. But when spring came and everything started leafing out, we could really see what was not leafing out, and it was really shocking to see how much we had lost. And so we're, we're learning a lot and talking to a lot of foresters and just trying to understand more about, what to do. It's hard to know what to do next. Should we plant a lot more trees? Should we leave some of these trees standing because they provide habitat for birds and other things, or some combination of that? But it's also amazing to see how resilient the landscape is. And right after the fire, within a few weeks after the first rains, everything that was black and singed on the ground was covered in a blanket of green. And we can already see saplings coming up, even where things burn pretty hot. But we're just still trying to figure out what the best move is, because we have a lot of steep slopes as well that were covered with trees, and they're a lot more exposed now. We're really conscious of erosion and what impact that's going to have on downstream from us.
And I think you're faced with a problem lots of people are faced with. I think the good news is that we actually live in a fire adapted ecosystem. And so all of these native tree species, as they normally occur, are actually really darn fire resilient. I'll be curious to go for a walk for you when we can do that, Ames, and see which trees are having mortality, because, for example, the oaks tend to be very resilient. And we are finding there are trees that look dead in that first year, and it's worth leaving them there for a year to see if they bounce back, because sometimes they bounce back in the second year. We also saw trees that we saw coming back to life and leafing out in the first year that then didn't make it through the second year. Our approach is really only to remove trees where they pose hazards, because of course, protection of life and property has to come first. And so at Pepperwood, we did a lot of hazard tree removal. And so people understand when a tree gets burned, it can be standing but kind of falling down for up to a couple years. And since we have kids come out on our trails to do field, trips and stuff, we had to make sure there were no trees where limbs could fall off or the trunk could fall down. And then we had one stand. Well, let me back up and say one of the management issues when you manage oak woodlands is that Douglas fir tend to invade those oak woodlands. And the hypothesis about that is because we live in a fire adapted ecosystem, the Native American people who are here stewarding these landscapes for the last 14,000 years, the evidence shows that they probably burned almost every inch of this landscape at least once a decade. So if you look at the Hanley fire and the fires we just had, and people say, oh, it's like a 60-year return interval on fire. Well, that's because we've been putting fires out. And by putting fires out, we actually let a lot of what we call fuels start growing in the understory. So if you can imagine a beautiful oak woodland with big trees spaced far apart and grass in between, that whole area could fill in the absence of fire, in the absence of Native American burning, with these Douglas firs. And I learned this early on as a grad student that Doug firs, they are a native plant, but they like to invade places, and the only thing that really controls them is fire. So for us, we had been doing quite a bit of forest treatments that involved removing those Douglas firs from an ecological viewpoint, because they were going to kill the oak trees, because they can grow fast, they can shade out the oaks underneath. But it was also for fire protection, because those Douglas firs are the trees that take the fire up into the canopy of the forest and cause the burn to be a lot hotter, and there's a lot more fuel in the area. So, really, in some ways, there's a lot of ecological renewal that comes with a fire. So to our eye, it looks like a lot of destruction, but cleaning out the understory of the forest, taking out, for us, most of the trees that were completely burned by the fire were already sick or down, sort of weeding out that material and removing fuels that could be available in a future fire. So that's very interesting. We look at just the Tubbs fire and the place that was Tubbs plus Kincade. In just the Tubbs, the once burned place, there's a lot of dead, what we call dead standing wood that could still burn in the next fire. But in the place where the Kincade came through, it cleaned all that stuff out. And so we have much less flammable material left because of the second fire. But there is a concern that if fire happens too often, you might convert a woodland to shrubs, or you might convert shrubs to grass because there won't be enough time in between the fires for the bigger trees to grow back. So that's all the kinds of questions we're asking. And I mean, it'll be fun to bring our ecologists back, Ames, to walk around with you and kind of share their perspective on that, because it may be a lot of what looks very damaged to you is also part of a natural process. And yet, as a land manager who has people visiting and things that you do out there, you definitely probably do want to pick out those hazard trees. But from an ecological viewpoint, replanting has not really been a big recommendation anywhere because there's so many seeds out there. And there's a natural regeneration process of which fire is really the mechanism of cleaning out the old dead stuff and making room for the new trees. So it could be just keeping an eye on it, see how they're doing.
And those seeds that sprout regenerate naturally they're very adapted to that site rather than something that was grown, 100 miles away. It might not be as well adapted.
And there's a term in forestry called overstocking, which is you overstock. So like at Pepperwood, we know that historically there were probably about 100 trees per unit area in Pepperwood, or 100 trees per acre, say. And now, before we started doing our forest treatment program, there were 1,000 trees per acre. So 10 times as many trees per acre, which is not really a healthy forest. It's overstocked. There's too many stems. And so to get back to our water question, it actually is also a forest that uses a lot more water and leaves a lot less water downstream for fish and for other uses. So that's what we're experimenting with at Pepperwood. We're actually we've been very actively thinning our forest, but we're gonna do an experiment where we thin and where we don't thin, and then measure everything about those two places, including putting in what's called a flux tower, which will measure the actual water vapor coming out of the ground above the canopy, and will also measure the carbon transfer. It's like the gold standard of measuring, well, oxygen and carbon and water vapor. So, and that's information we really don't know. We have models and we can estimate, but there can be disagreements, like what the impact will be on a stream of thinning the forest next door. So that's our goal, is to actually measure that and then help people know. I guess the other thing that's great is, like, we have a lot of workshops that we do on site, and especially after both fires, we had the hazard tree workshop where neighbors could come and see our property and talk to our managers and hear what's involved in it, right? Because taking down a hazardous tree you don't do that by yourself. You know, and if you want to thin your forest, you actually need to work with a forester, and what are they looking for? How do you work with them? And how much do we spend on this? We spend about $800 an acre treating forests, so, how do you work that out? So, and we're also part of a lot of collaboratives to help landowners learn how to do this, and also to encourage landowners to team up for forest management, because if we can get a number of larger properties to work together and get a forester to do a plan for a larger area, it reduces the cost for everyone. It can be easier to get permits. So we're looking for sort of incentive programs for especially private landowners to get the resources they need to do this work. So.
Cool. Lisa, can you tell people how they can find out more about you, how they can join or take advantage of some of your really cool educational programs?
Oh, yeah. Thank you for helping me remember. So we're at www.pepperwoodpreserve.org, www.pepperwoodpreserve.org. We're on Facebook. We now have a YouTube channel. So normally we have about 10,000 people a year come visit Pepperwood, everyone from kids to families, etc. Right now we can only have staff on site for essential services, but all of our educational programs are now virtual and online. So we're doing field trips for kids. If you're teaching kids at home and you need them something to do, we have a whole series for elementary school kids online, including field trips. And now our courses, like we just did last three we did one on how to do your own wildlife camera, and that's now, we do those as virtual trainings. We did one on insects and botany of California. So like I said, look at our website, you can sign up through there, or look at the Facebook. And we will reopen sooner or later. We have a wonderful membership program, and Sloan Shin, who's on here with me, she's our membership and community engagement person. So membership is really the best way to get sort of behind the scenes special hikes and hearing directly from the scientists. We have senior and family memberships available. So if you're really curious, that's great, or people can just contact me if they want to learn more. I'm accessible via the website as well.
Cool. And then for those of you that are curious, Medlock Ames is about to reopen its tasting room on June 12th. So we'll have private, very spaced out seatings there if anyone's interested in coming to taste. And then also, I really want to thank everybody for joining in and watching. And I wanted to just sort of acknowledge that, we thought about maybe, postponing this chat in light of all of the sort of what's going on in the world and what's going on in the United States right now. And also there's a huge, but then I thought, there's a huge fairness and justice aspect to climate change. It's not going to, or it's not impacting everybody in a fair and equitable way. It's certain groups of people are going to be impacted much more heavily. So these, the same ideas of justice that we're seeing with police brutality, there have impacts with climate change as well, and that's a whole other topic. But I don't know, it seemed like it was a good idea to discuss the impacts of climate change now.
Yeah, I agree with you, Ames. I mean, I just think that environmental stressors and public health stressors, they just amplify the inequity in our culture. And so this double whammy of first the climate and sort of environmental justice issues, and then coming with coronavirus, and now, it's just bringing it to a head. So, and that's just been a heavy feeling for me. It's always the disadvantaged communities are more in a weaker, more and more vulnerable position with these stressors. And we're really excited to be in a partnership with Sonoma State right now, asking the Latino leadership to guide us around climate change vulnerabilities and what are the perceptions coming from within that community about climate change concerns, and then helping to respond to some of those using the same kind of data I was sharing with you today, specific to their questions and concerns. So it's going to be hopefully an interesting collaboration.
Well, great. Well, thank you so much, Lisa, and thanks to everybody for joining in.
Thank you, Ames.
Take care.
Thanks, everyone. Do you have any questions or? Thanks. Thanks, Deb.